Right, well, good morning everybody, and this is the second session. This is where we're a bit mischievous, perhaps, where we call it the staffing of the, let's get the right type, professor, here we go. As my daughter calls me, having professorial moment, here we are. Staffing the future of pharma, finding, getting and keeping the right people. We in Pharma Integrates, because I've been associated with Pharma Integrates now for the last 3 years, always try and put a people element into these sessions. Because at the end of the day, it isn't companies that discover drugs, is it? It's people. And getting the right people to the right job at the right time is critical. We have an excellent panel to the people on my left-hand side. So what I'll do, people who don't know who I am, Professor Gino Martini, I'm ex-Glaxo director, senior director, ran groups all over the world. Prior to that, I was Catalent, I think. It used to be called something else in those days. Been in business over 20 years, been an academic for 3 years. So I've moved from, I'm a pharmacist by training, from community to industry to academia, so I'm quite a rare beast in that respect. Beast anyway in general. So that's who I am. And I'll hand over to Paul to introduce himself, get the panel to tell who they are, and then we'll take it from there.
Very good. Thank you. And good morning to everyone. My name is Paul Stewart with Pfizer Pharmaceutical. I have 23 years experience in the healthcare industry with both Procter & Gamble and Pfizer. Have been in roles in technical product development, sourcing management for R&D and supply chain activities, finance and business management roles, and most recently in supply chain and drug product supply business for our pharmaceutical sciences organization. I'm currently based at our R&D center in Groton, Connecticut in America, but I've spent the last 4 years at our UK R&D facility in Sandwich in the southeast of England, so I'm very pleased to be back in England after spending a lot of time here. My background is in chemical engineering as well as an MBA degree in business. My stake in staffing and future of pharmaceutical success is really related to my role on our pharmaceutical sciences executive team, which has put a lot of effort into understanding the real challenges we have from a staffing perspective following many years of industry consolidation. So we've spent a lot of time over the last probably 18 months on workforce planning initiatives, and I can share some of those perspectives with you here today. So thank you again and good morning.
Sarah?
Hello, my name's Sarah Hayward. I am the Chief Operating Officer of an organisation called MedCity. MedCity is a new organisation, toddler of an organisation, pulling ourselves up on the furniture, having been launched by the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, and the 3 London academic health science centres in April of this year. My background is, I always say I have 2 tracks to my career. One is healthcare and life sciences, and the other is HR. I have worked in the NHS, I've worked in the pharmaceutical industry, and I've worked in central government. And I've kind of flip-flopped between those 2 areas, bizarrely, throughout the course of my working life. And many times people management in life sciences has been the kind of key part of what I've been doing. I have a master's in human resources management, and I think one of the reasons that I was perhaps asked to be on this panel is that up to the end of last year, I was one of the directors in the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills Labour Market Directorate, which is the part of government that sets the employment law framework. So I was very heavily involved in European employment law framework, working time, and something called posting of workers. And I was also setting the family-friendly work-life balance employment policies that this government has been taking through. And I led the legislation through Parliament for the extension of the right to request flexible working to all employees, and also shared parental leave, which is the ability for fathers to share their partner's maternity leave, which will come into effect in April of next year. with my Med City hat on, with the role I have now, my particular interest is around developing the entrepreneurial culture in London and the Greater South East, in encouraging more interplay between industry and academia, and ensuring that we have the skills to allow good ideas to come out of the academic base and to be taken forward.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, sir. Nick Stevens. I own a business called RSA. We are a life sciences recruiter, built it into a global business, so 8 offices on 3 continents. We help about 300 people a year into leadership positions in the life sciences industry. We've been doing that for 33 years. Before that, I started as a baby and turned into a lawyer. Didn't enjoy that. Tried metals trading, lots of money. No real pleasure, and then I decided to join the industry for the same reason I think you did, which is that, you know, if we do our job well, every morning, every day, people get better, and that's a very motivational thing to do. So, hence I'm here.
Thank you, Nick. And as you can see, it's a very comprehensive and experienced panel here. What we're going to do is I have a question as an icebreaker which I've shared with the panel, and the panel will give their view. I warn you though, as a professor, I'm very naughty. I will pull you and ask questions from you and throw my weight around, so there's plenty of me to do so, so be prepared. But I mean, it was something that, Paul, you sent me an email yesterday. I really liked it because I have no word for it. Is the pharma industry attracted to the next generation of scientists? You call them the new millennials. I think Michael Douglas in Wall Street 2 called them ninjas, which is no income, no jobs, no assets, equals no commitment. Okay, and so I use that framework because the question I asked you to think about is what skills do you see as being the most important now over the next 5 years if the industry is to succeed? And bearing in mind, we must have displaced 35,000 people from jobs in the last 10 years. That's how big the number is. I live in Old Harlow, you walk around Harlow and there's some big buildings there empty. So some massive changes have occurred. So what are the skills, Paul, do you see as being the most important now and over the next 5 years if this is to succeed? And bearing in mind we have ninjas flying around everywhere.
Very good. So just to provide a little bit of context from my perspective on this question, we've been living in a world of mergers, divestitures, acquisitions, partnerships. We talked about it yesterday in the general session. The chart that was shown certainly demonstrates that clearly. I think we've all been a part of it in some way. From a Pfizer perspective and from my point of view, what's really shaped the company over the past decade are 3 major mergers, starting with Warner Lambert, and then Pharmacia, and then Wyeth. So each of those companies actually were made up of many legacy companies themselves, and so you can put them all together and call this business Pfizer today. It's really comprised of a very heavy, concentrated mix of pharmaceutical expertise, really probably representing the past 20 to 30 years. To give you an example of what the consolidation and rationalization that has come with that, in 2004, 10 years ago, our pharmaceutical sciences business was comprised of about 3,800 staff spread across 32 sites around the world and managing over 30 GMP facilities across API, drug product, packaging operations. Today, 10 years later, we have 1,400 staff, so from 3,800 to 1,400. We have 4 sites, really 2 major ones and then 2 minor ones, so from 32 sites to 4, and from 30 plus GMP facilities to 6. So that's been our transformation over the past year. What we've done during that time is worked really hard to retain the best talent from all of the legacy companies. So where we find ourselves today as we look up after this 10-year period is a very skilled workforce, but a very significant gap behind that workforce. During that time, the recruiting machine, new PhDs, new scientists, really has been turned off. We've done certainly selective recruiting and we've been backfilling positions, but in terms of a regular flow and dynamic of talent into the organization, it's been quite stagnant. We've been doing just the opposite. We've actually been rationalizing our workforce to this new business model. So today, this gap becomes a very significant issue for us. We're starting to turn that machinery on again, and we can talk about some of the tactics and strategies that are being put in place. But it's very slow. We talked about the big ship turning slowly. Well, it turns slowly on this front as well. So with that backdrop, my input in terms of key skills and key focus for this period of time really comes back to some of the core science and technology needs of the business. So this is chemical R&D, API development, analytical development, certainly with new technologies emerging. Formulation. On the manufacturing side, there's a gap as well for both traditional manufacturing and some of that 1940s technology that we laughed about yesterday is still very important. In fact, it's what runs most of our business today. So while we have a lot of terrific emerging opportunities in front of us, the fact is we still have a very basic core of manufacturing skills that are needed. And then finally, there's a mix of business skills that are really important today that haven't been so much in the past. Part of that is sourcing management. So we've talked a lot about really the entire model is partial internal capability, partial external capability. And so we need the right skills to manage those relationships and manage the business aspect of that. Certainly business development, licensing development, again, just integral part of how the industry does business today. And finally, some very unique skills around global distribution, import, export, legal and regulatory skills that have just become critical to enable R&D and clinical trials to take place around the world. So when it comes to the new millennials and the new workforce coming in, the key is really attracting those top scientists, those top technical minds, the top innovators into an industry that has been very stagnant, I think, for some period of time.
Thank you, Paul. Well, I think I'm going straight on to Sarah because I think it's important to get the whole perspective, and I'll open the floor for some Q&A. Sarah?
From my perspective, I agree actually with many of the things that Paul has said, but my perspective obviously is different on this, particularly looking at the small and medium-sized business base and the changing model, which again we heard about yesterday, in terms of divestment from big research and development facilities that are within house and much more of open innovation models and partnership models with academia. And one thing, I'll just put it on the table now, we can come back to it. In fact, that Paul and I were talking about yesterday evening was the fact that companies like Pfizer that have had these huge workforces previously have been the training camps for all of the people who flow out into the rest of the ecosystem. So they have provided the people with expertise around drug discovery, drug development, clinical development into the rest of the life sciences industry. And if the model is changing and those training academies within big pharma don't exist in the future, how are we going to get the skills that we need? But for me, there are 4 areas that I'm really interested in across the work that we're doing in London and across the region. So the first is management and leadership. The people who can do all of those things that I've just been talking about, can lead companies, can think strategically about where they need to take them, how to drive them forward, how to make really investable propositions and make the right strategic alliances. Again and again, I hear that the key to attracting investment is actually about the quality of the leadership of small companies. The second, which Paul mentioned, is business development, so is around the licensing and the strategic engagement and the working out where the deals and the assets are and being able to set up the right kind of deals. The third area is something that, in fact, I don't know if any of you heard the business section between when would it have been, 6 and 6:30 on the Today programme this morning, but Joanna Shields from Tech City was speaking about some initiatives that are being taken forward by Cambridge and UCL to develop skills within digital, and I think that the growth of digital healthcare solutions, either as an adjunct to traditional pharma or as alternative solutions, will be critical, and the skills in that area will be important. And with that comes an associated set of issues around commercial skills, which leads me into my fourth area, which is around health economics and being able to really engage effectively with the procurers, with the health technology assessment systems, and into the markets.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I'd like to kind of take this back to the last few days, FT conference, and this one's better, by the way. I think we're doing really well. So my first observation is that the IP model of the pharmaceutical industry is dead, but it hasn't noticed yet. The second one is that no outcome, no income. So who's the payer? Well, it's all of us. At the end of the day, it's us in the wealth-creating industries who earn money, pay taxes, pay insurance contributions, and then pay for our healthcare. The next piece is that the pipelines seem to have disappeared. And so at the moment, big pharma is looking to small pharma, biotech, to replace their pipelines. Next piece is that data has become ubiquitous to the point that it's a part of every product and every service on the planet. And pharmaceuticals are just a small part of that data that makes up how we stay healthy, stop ourselves getting ill, or make ourselves better. So there is a fundamental shift in the way our industry needs to engage with its customers, with its partners, and its partners in the future will include not just Google, Apple, Amazon, but pet shops. Again, health is ubiquitous because it is about you and everything you do. So many of the leadership of our industries have kind of built themselves a prison over the last 30 years. And it's a prison bounded on one side by regulation and on the other side by an IP centricity. Other industries create value by creating IP. They don't believe that the IP has value of itself. And IP has no value of itself unless people do something with it. You do something with it. So the question is, which people are going to be transformational? Do they exist in our industry today? If they do, my observation is I think they are leading members of the escape committee. These are the people who are pushing against the boundaries. These are the people who are saying, why can't we buy a health club? These are the people who are saying, we shouldn't prescribe an antihypertensive, we should buy this person a dog. Yeah, real solutions, real outcomes. So what skills do we need that I don't see, especially in big pharma? The first one is, if I typify much of big pharma, it has a kind of East Coast US arrogance to it. For me to win, you have to lose. That's not how you work a partnership. We both have to win in a partnership. When I have 6 or 7 partners, that's a really complex and important skill. It's more of a mindset than it is a skill. So you move from vendor management to working in a relationship with people where we all win. And if we focus on just getting better, we can do that, making people better. Data, really understanding and using data and accepting that sometimes our pill is not just the solution. Sometimes there's a better solution. And if we give the person a better solution, we'll do better in the end. Consumer marketing. We in the pharmaceutical industry, we are rubbish at consumer marketing. Apple can make you queue for 6 hours for a phone that does nothing more than the last phone did, or the phone before that, or the phone before that, and you'll pay $1,000 for it. Amazing. But you won't pay $7 for a vaccine. Behaviour change. How we change our own behaviour, our organisational behaviour, and the behaviour of our consumers. Appetite for risk. Let's just try this. The industry has kind of made a profession of avoiding risk by allowing the regulators to lead. And I think we need to push back, and push back hard at this. And one weird one, just packaging. I don't just mean, you know, the plastic you wrap the pill in, but the way we present what we do. Had a beautiful lesson from a friend of mine who's CEO of Pepsi's nutrition business, but formerly 20 years in the pharmaceutical industry. And Steve Jobs, before he died, they invited him to talk to the board of Pepsi. To say, how important to you, Pepsi, is your packaging? And they all said, well, it's vital. It's, you know, it's our brand. All of our packaging carries our brand. It's carrying our message. So they said, well, which one of you on the executive has experience in packaging? And they went, none of us. And so he asked the non-executive, the independent directors, which one of you has experience in packaging? And none of us. So he said, packaging is not important to your business. So let's replace packaging with patient. I'll leave you with that.
Well, thank you, Nick. Well, some very interesting views. So we can play this both ways. I can talk and ask questions, or we can throw it open. Anybody interested to ask a question? Daniel, yeah? Daniel, and then Don.
Yeah, my name is Daniel Steenstra, and if you indulge me, I would like you to draw into my world. I'm the visiting professor of the Royal Academy of Engineering in medical innovation. The Royal Academy of Engineering has got about 100 of us, all boring, grey old guys. And our job is to help the universities to change and make them more, you know, so we deliver people that are more equipped to the industry needs. I'm the only one that represents medical innovation, and we're struggling. So my question is, is the university system fit for purpose to deliver people that we need in the future pharma? And if the answer is no, how do we change that? Let me frame that, because I'm actually working. I have some experience in medical devices, I've got some experience in pharma, and I see a lack of leadership, I see a lack of consumer understanding, I see a lack of understanding who the consumer actually is, what's the difference between what the payer wants and what the patient wants, and so on. So I see lots of skills missing. Who is going to sort it out? Thank you.
Well, lady and gentlemen, perhaps I could answer this question because I'm an academic. Or do you guys want to go first, or do you want me to have a
I
pop?
was just wondering if Malcolm Skingle's in the audience, because
Yeah.
he's got
He's
strong
not
views on
here.
this.
He's
No,
not
shame.
here today. No,
Yeah.
I asked him whether he was going to be here.
Do you want me to have a go?
Yeah.
This one? Please, he says. So, okay, right. How do I answer this question? Right, so I left GSK 3 years ago, and it took me 2 years to stop thinking like a GSK person. So that's what happened. So I went for those pains. But in the first 3 days of walking around King's College corridors, I met, well, at least 3 or 4 people who put drugs on the market. Discovered and put them on the market. I think I struggled to find 3 at GSK in the years I was there. So there's something going on. And there's some incredibly bright people at universities who discover and do things unfettered, unhindered by bureaucracy. Don't get me wrong, there's politics. Like I said to Tommy Dolan, yes, in Pfizer, the politics is the same, just the numbers are different. GSK, you fight over 10, 20 million. King's, it's like 100,000, 10,000, what have you. So there's some bright people. The problem about universities, though, is they don't think like a collective. They don't understand project teams. They don't understand working as a team. Why? Because the funding structures, this is my observations, doesn't allow collegiate working. You know, you're awarded being a PI, which is primary investigator, or a co-PI, secondary investigator, which is crazy, because this year we won a very large grant due to an intervention that I made by one phone call. I don't get credit for that. Craziness. You know, Doesn't make any sense. So we need to go to a situation where academics become more collegiate, work as a team. The funding bodies have to be more open and collaborative and allow that to happen. Things are changing because you have not heard of REF 2014. You're going to hear it in December the 18th when the results come out. And this year, we've adopted the American model. So the old ways universities were graded was 100% was marked on your research outputs. You put something in Nature, Lancet, blah, blah, blah. Now it's different. 65% goes on your papers. I was on the panel, so I should remember this. 20% goes on impact. And 50% goes on environment. Okay? So impact is what's happened to your idea. Did something happen? Was there an economic output? Did you employ people? Was a company spun out? Did you make a benefit to people's lives? And is the environment conducive to allow that to occur? So I can tell you, some individuals have got it, some universities haven't, but by December the 18th, there's all public knowledge, the results will come out, and how universities will be funded will be gauged by that Premier League of who's done what, where and why, that combined score. And that's basically the government saying, we'll give you £1, you've got to give us £1 plus, and that's going to make universities extremely different in how they operate. So that's going to be radical. The Whitty report, which came out in 2013, he looked at this, and he wants the score to go from 20% to 25%. Probably I think that will happen. So it's going to be more radical. So universities are changing. They don't like the change, but they are changing. Hiring people like me to come into academia has been a move, like yourself, Daniel, and you can see more of that as time progresses. I think Sarah uses a wonderful expression of porous boundaries. It has to happen. You have to have this movement of people backwards and forwards, because if you don't get the exchange of ideas. And I think that's what hinders innovation. That we've in the good old days before mergers and acquisitions, there were so many companies, people moved around. Okay, now there's fewer companies, and I'm sorry to say, pensions have trapped people in certain positions, so they can't move around, and so we don't get this exchange of ideas and cross-fertilisation that you had 20 odd years ago, and that's been the problem going forward. So academia is changing, and I see things happening. So that's me talking. Any comments, anybody?
After you, sir.
Okay. So I would agree with everything you've said, Gina. I think that in the time that I have been working in the industry and moving from industry into government, well, let me just go back. When I was working for industry, I was as the operations head for a drug discovery unit of a big multinational pharmaceutical company that was located on the UCL campus. Our relationship with UCL was primarily as landlord and tenant. There were some academic linkages because some of the senior staff had come from UCL, but the linkage was more that they could go and use the senior staff common room. With the benefit of hindsight, I look back and think what a huge opportunity we missed there. In preparing for this session, we exchanged some emails. I talked about this idea of porous boundaries. The movement backwards and forwards is the holy grail. That's what the changes to the REF framework are all about. Is about moving away from the currency being about your publications and citation index demonstrating your excellence, and much more about your openness to engage with industry and to collaborate and to think about the impact. And I think in the UK we still have a long way to go, but I think it's moving in the right direction. But I'll give you a kind of a final anecdote. A couple of weeks ago, I went and was invited by a different pharmaceutical company to the one that I work for to go and speak at a PhD day that they held, where they were sponsoring a whole set of PhD students, some of whom were working in the labs of the pharma company, some of whom were working in their respective universities. And whilst I was waiting to go in, I was asking some questions about the extent to which the PhD supervisors were engaging with the PIs in the pharmaceutical company. And actually I came away with a sense that they weren't at all. So there was this what on the surface looked like a fantastic piece of engagement and collaboration, which was about industrial sponsorship of PhD studentships, but using it for no more than just looking at some areas of interesting science. So there are huge opportunities. There are lots of things that we can do. We just need to start doing some of them.
Absolutely.
So just briefly to add, in terms of preparing students to enter the workforce and help fill this gap and be competitive early on, what I've seen is the relationships we've been building with universities for internships, co-ops, work placements is really a key. So this is more undergraduate, bachelor, master's levels, pre-PhD programs. But we have students at our Cambridge, Massachusetts research centers, biology and chemistry students working with our research units on really integrated with the fundamental discovery teams. We have relationships with many of the major universities in the U.S. That actually will place students with us for 6 and 8 months as part of their program, earning academic credit, either working on specific projects or just general resource. But I think it's those experiences as part of the education process, being able to be exposed to industry, understand what sitting on a project team is while you're in the middle of the academic experience, I think can contribute a lot as well.
Very good. Thank you.
Completely. Sorry, Tina.
Hello. Duncan Judd, Iridian. I'm based at the Stevens Bioscience Catalyst. My background is I'm a medicinal chemist. I have been for a number of years, card-carrying medicinal chemist. And I'd like to return a little bit to staffing of the future of the pharma, particularly in this area. I believe a medicinal chemist is rather a unique beast in the sense that you learn about how to operate by training on the job. It's not something which you can actually learn within perhaps a university environment because it's a complex science in developing new drugs affecting many parameters. So my concern is that Sarah mentioned it already, that we're in a position whereby the number of staff in big pharma are actually reducing. And in fact, the problem is already here. I went to a lecture fairly recently, and Chris Newton from Biofocus gave us some figures. And I was absolutely astounded on these numbers. So I can't remember the numbers exactly, so please don't quote me on them. But to give you a feel, he was quoting the number of medicinal chemists at GSK in Stevenage in the UK, and that's a total number of 75. When that compares with the number of chemists in companies like GVK or Chem Biotech in India, each have about 500 chemists. I grant you they're not all medicinal chemists. But then companies like Wuxi in China have now got somewhere in the region of over 3,000 chemists. So the dynamics are changing, and I would put it to the panel at the moment that we're already in an issue about training future medicinal chemists, those who are going to design new medicines for the future. And I think we're in a position where it's no longer going to be sustainable in terms of big pharma producing quality scientists for drug discovery, and I don't think we're going to, in 5 or 10 years' time, we're going to have that pool of talent, particularly within the UK, to be able to move into smaller companies. And I was wondering whether the panel had any ideas on how we might address that particular issue.
Paul, any ideas? Because what Pfizer's got an approach.
Yeah, well, certainly would agree with the problem statement, and certainly from a business model, we've also shifted quite a bit to biologics development as well. So we have fundamentally changed what had been basic research in the industry, and with very precious research dollars and research programs. They're now split amongst a very large number of opportunities on the small molecule and large molecule side. So that also has eroded the base. I do think, while I'm certainly not an expert in this area and from a medicinal chemist perspective, I do believe the path is set. I don't see large pharma rebuilding that massive infrastructure. I think it will have to, the feeder pool will have to rely on different sources. Exactly what those are, probably they involve mid-sized companies, they involve contract research organizations, but I don't see large pharma shifting back in any way. Certainly not the signals I see today.
Okay. I think we need to make note of that, and it's quite an interesting statistic, certainly. But conscious of time, and there are some questions, so I think the lady here, and then over this guy. To you? Yeah.
So my concern is sort of almost the opposite of the medicinal chemist question. It's the other way around. Not that we rely on pharma to train up our new chemists and bring them through into the smaller companies, but it's that in biologics and biotech industry, where I've worked for 10 years, we're relying on postdocs coming through small biotechs and startups. And hopefully, I imagine that pharma companies imagine that they are going to feed their innovative work pool. But for me, it seems a very oil and water situation where I've dealt closely with big pharma companies, and the people who seem to have survived in them, who are there in decision-making positions, are the intransigent people who haven't been caught out. They've managed to duck when the side has been swung. So they're not necessarily the people who are most inclined to take risks, see innovative opportunities, and create an environment for innovative people to work. And my only successful experience of a biotech company that's then been emerged into a pharma company was with AstraZeneca, where they swallowed Cambridge antibody technology where I was working, and then decided very wisely to leave us completely alone because we seemed to be doing very well by ourselves, thank you very much. And in fact, the new model for the Cambridge facility, well, I think borrow a lot from the successes of the way that Medi and CAT's facilities work down there, rather than bringing all the edge down to Cambridge. So really, how on earth is that model going to become miscible, the new biologists, with the old management in the pharma?
Mm-hmm. Well, you've certainly opened up a potentially Pandora's box question. Panel, anybody? Yeah, Nick?
That's right. No, that's. I think it goes back to what you need for success in different kinds of organisations. You're absolutely right. Big Pharma has evolved into a risk reduction machine. So to succeed, you need to reduce risk. Creativity, discovering new therapies, requires a completely different mindset. You need to make that jump. You need to have confidence between the connections you're making in your mind and then follow them through. At some point it becomes a process, and that's when Pfizer start to add some real value, because as a machine for grinding things through phase 3, it's pretty good. As a machine for making creative leaps, sorry, no. And its answer has been historically to buy companies and then evaporate the value of them. It's true. What is it, 100 and something billion in acquisitions over the last 15 years, and the market cap's the same today as it was. So what's the answer? The answer is you need an ecosystem which feeds people into biotech, allows them to create some value, and allows them to bounce straight back out and start and do it again. That's, I think, the only answer. They are immiscible.
So I certainly appreciate the perspective, or maybe would have chose to describe things a little differently.
I think it's a good job I'm sitting between the two of you, isn't it?
No, we'll be fine.
Yeah. So I'll take the opportunity to say between the early comment around the East Coast sort of macho and then this characterization, I wasn't prepared for what I was into here today. So no. But I will comment seriously, because some of the thoughts I had put together thinking about this, I think you're absolutely right. the flow of talent from small startup and even mid-sized company into large pharma is not an easy flow. And many of the people I've spoke to and people we've tried to recruit from smaller companies have this image of large pharma that they believe they either are concerned with or won't fit in. Some of the characterization and profile is correct, but some of it is misled. But I do think that is a general barrier before you even begin the dialogue about the opportunity. There's a bias there that makes it very difficult.
Okay. Before I ask the next question, just a comment to what Tim was saying. I mean, of course, the classic one, of course, is Roche buying Genentech. I mean, that really became successful. Now Genentech's now ruling Roche right now. So, and that was just creative, very different mindset. Just got on with it, did what they had to do. So there is a precedent out there. And maybe after we get the next question, we could talk about what's causing this stagnation. Is it, why isn't there more movement? I think that's key. It's got another 15 minutes to go. Okay.
Okay, so quickly then.
Please.
The title here is Staffing the Future of Pharma. We've spent, I think, about 45 minutes talking about staffing the future of research, which is one piece of pharma. Now, pharma itself has had to move and will continue to move from a B2B company to a business-to-consumer company. From a making fine chemicals, which are really fine food companies, really, foods you eat when you're ill, to becoming healthcare companies. Could I ask the panel to suggest one other industry that you would like to see some porous barriers with, that are really going to bring some new talent and new thinking into this industry, stop us being the ivory towers that we've become, start being a bit more like the tech companies who actually would not take the view, well, in order to go to be a company around the Silicon Roundabout, you must have spent 14 years at BT. You'd be laughed out of the room if you did that, right? So, how are we going to staff the future of pharma by actually learning from another industry, God forbid?
Really good question. Paul?
So one aspect where there's an opportunity, I believe, is the consumer products industry, and this is really in the vein of understanding consumer needs. So we've started to look really at what patients need, and of course we balance payers and internal stakeholders and patients, but I think the consumer products industry has done a terrific job of really understanding what benefit they can bring in the products they develop. I think they also are making use of technology, social media, in ways that maybe aren't the most innovative across all industries, but it's very related to the healthcare industry. So I think from an applicability standpoint, there's probably less of a barrier to leverage some of those approaches.
Sarah?
Well, in my earlier on, I mentioned digital, and what I was really thinking about there is the fact that I don't think that the industry in the future will be just about the pill. I think it will be. It may or may not be about the pill. Somebody said about, or you said about walking the dog, but will be integrated into monitoring systems and data, and in fact, I am really keen on engineering, and engineering in the broadest sense. Being integrated, we've already seen a few examples of where Grand Prix, teams have been engaging with healthcare, those sorts of things. I don't think you can kind of say it has to be that. It could be any. I think the idea of chucking completely different groups of people together is a good idea, but engineering seems to be one for me I would definitely pick.
I think that the best example at the moment is actually the automotive industry. So the automotive industry has gone from people who did everything end to end to being a diaspora of supplier organisations, supply chains, and they still manage to make things that you really want. So auto industry, I think, is where we've learned it.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, when Enzo Ferrari refused to give Ford their engine, Ford made their own engine, the GT. When Nissan refused to give the diesel engine to BMW. They made it from scratch. So it's interesting. Also, from my own experience, the defence industry, it's interesting. When you work with those guys, you give them a mission, they will just, not just throw money at it, they will look at it in very different ways and look at ideas all over all different sectors. So they're interesting. I can't talk much about the defence, but it's been very, very interesting to see how they operate. So one more question. So Bill and then Andy. Bill?
Great. We'd like to pick up on that last question because we'd like to just make a few comments, really.
Sure, Bill.
If you look at the industry, you're right. It's not just discovery. It's development and it's manufacturing and it's delivery and it's patient care. And who connects that up? Well, the senior management might consider they do it, but in practice they don't. And there tends to be a lot of silos in the industry, and that doesn't help in either the motivation of the research people, or for that matter, the development people. So I think we traditionally fall into the trap of looking at the industry as a homogeneous whole, and it isn't, and we shouldn't do that. It's a multiplicity of different disciplines, and we need processes that allow those disciplines to more freely act together. Now, I am also chairman of the Academy of Pharmaceutical Sciences, and we have seen across the wider range of small companies and large companies the use of pharmaceutical scientists, many of them in small companies rather than large companies, and big companies feeding on that. So that's the sort of background to the question, which is really back to academia, because the people who are going to do this, we don't yet have. We've got companies staffed with people who don't see the problem, and we'd like to train people who do see the problem. So academia needs to look at both undergraduate and postgraduate training, and how many of them are doing that. Really interesting that in the States they are. There's been very little pickup in the UK to try to do that, partly because big companies aren't easily funding those sort of intern-type programs into the British academic sphere. Some of that is because the British academic sphere didn't want it, and also because companies have not been oriented to that. And to be fair, government hasn't easily found a way to sponsor that type of operation. So for my question to the panel is, how do we actually manipulate the training element, the early element of our young people that we want to bring forward for the future of our industries? How do we get them into the right space to do this integrative work that is the future for the healthcare industry?
Just two quick comments for a little added context on some of the programs in the U.S. The real drivers from industry perspective is the opportunity to bring in at relatively low cost sort of on-the-spot consultants for specific work and projects, and more importantly, it feeds a recruiting machine. So you've had the benefit of working with someone. The recruiting, as we've talked about, hasn't been extensive, but that just makes the hiring decision all the more critical. And with this base of experience and exposure, you're able to have more confidence in those decisions you take.
Sorry, Nick, anything?
So a couple of thoughts. I completely agree with your premise. I think that you're making that there is a bit of a market failure at the moment in terms of the funding of training within academia versus the funding of training within the industry in the broad, and that particularly the idea of internships, sandwich students, etc., where people have dual training has not been as well developed as it might. And I think that to solve it, that we need to come up with some new ways of doing things. It might be about some government funding to actually incentivise it and make it happen, because the only other way that it gets funded is if both sides are seeing that they're doing it for the greater good, and of course that's not the economic model on which either side is founded. So I think that there could be much more support from perhaps the research councils, Innovate UK, from central government, which already funds a lot about skills, about exchange. We think of apprenticeships as being a route for people that are not pursuing higher education. But to a certain extent, what we actually need is postgraduate apprenticeships, which allow movement backwards and forwards. And I think there's a real appetite, actually, amongst younger people within academia who are doing PhDs and postdocs or MScs to be able to have some time where they could, that they could explore other options and do things. So one of the things I think is about deployment of time and giving people a little bit of space. So maybe they do, 80% of their time is dedicated to their PhD, but one day a week they can be going and doing an internship or working alongside somebody in a completely different part. So I think there are solutions. It's about incentivizing it and understanding where the pots of money sit.
Okay.
I'll try to be brief. I think it is part of education's job to increase the sum of human knowledge and help people to do that. The other part of it is to prepare people for work. And I think we have failed our young people in allowing courses to become modular, easy to pick, and avoiding the practical skills. When a large pharmaceutical company has to train people to make a 10th molar solution, I got a C in chemistry and I can do that. It's ridiculous. So we've failed our young people. The way to do that is to make courses more practically based. And as far as internships go, brilliant. Familiarity breeds familiarity. If you understand what people need, then you can deliver it.
Great, thanks. I'm going to do one more question from Andy, then I'm going to change the agenda slightly and talk about women in leadership roles, because that was one of the things we wanted to talk about. I've only got 4.5 minutes, and I apologise. One point I will make, though, and I want to, it's been a bane of my life in the last year, has been visas. Okay? Can somebody of any influence sort this out? Because we've got some fantastically bright scientists and individuals, actually from North America, who I'd like to work in the UK, right, or Commonwealth countries like Australia and New Zealand, who I feel should be working collaboratively in the UK. But the visa situation is an absolute nightmare, and it needs to be dealt with ASAP, because it's frustrating for people like me. So that's me jumping in. Andy, question.
Yeah, it's interesting listening to the discussion, actually, because I don't think I'm hearing the answer to the solution. Because what I hear people talking about is staffing pharma now. And I don't think we really understand what the future of pharma is. So I lead the Pharmaceutical Innovation Group. There's a brilliant quote from Bill Gates which says, "The future is here, it's just not very evenly distributed." So I'll just tell you, so we have lots of interesting programs running. Companies that we're actively working with: Vodafone, Spoonful of Sugar, which is a behavioural change company that spun out of UCL, a medical device and telemetry company that I can't name, that's based out of Asia. We talked to McLaren because they know an awful lot about sensing and telemetry. There are no shortage of very, very bright chemistry graduates, pharmacy graduates. But for me, the future is very, very bright scientists who have the ability to collaborate. And where I see the university system of a bachelor's degree and a PhD failing us is that it supports a model of independent research, and the world runs on collaborative research.
Yeah.
I'd just like to hear your comments on that.
Well, I mean, I think, Paul did mention at the beginning about we need graduates of all kinds of skill sets, and the American system has a bachelor's degree. We have minors in there, so you have somebody who does a life sciences degree with a minors in economics, for example. So maybe that's what we should be doing a bit more. So there's some failings. But Paul, very briefly, you sort of hit upon that at the very beginning, didn't you? Do you want to?
Yeah, and certainly that we have, I spoke generically about the skills and the targets. So really, I think what you're speaking to gets to the basis of digital design, using data, collaborating with non-pharma industry and expertise. So we talk a lot about predictive degradation modeling, chemometrics, flow chemistry, and abilities to tap power of data that we really just scratched the surface on today. So those are elements and targeted pieces of what I think is needed in the future and where we are targeting, but you hit on a really, really key point. There's no platform for the partnership. Everyone undertakes it in one-off ways. So there's certainly, from an opportunity space, I would agree that there's a gap there.
We have a minute left, and I'm really quite embarrassed because this topic requires a whole discussion. But me and Sarah, we were talking about women in leadership roles, and some of my best bosses have actually been women, to be honest. So I mean, do you want to maybe just round off the session with what your view is on that and what you'd like to see, your vision, maybe?
My starting point on this is reflecting on the experience that we had as we were recruiting to the advisory board for MedCity. And if any of you would care to go and look at the page that introduces the advisory board on the MedCity website, you will see a sea of grey-haired gentlemen, all of whom are fantastic and are right at the leading area that they're working in, but we struggled to find women, and it grieved me even to kind of think that was the starting premise of struggling to find women who were appropriate candidates. So, I mean, you're absolutely right, Gino. It's the time's up, so we can't even start to discuss it. We could have taken it as a session in its own right. Big issue for me is about how we make sure that we keep women in the workplace and keep their careers progressing so that they can get into the leadership positions and be more prominent as well. You said you've had lots of really good women bosses. We need to see more of them, I think.
Nick?
I believe that in life sciences we've been tracking this for 4 or 5 years in proper research, and I believed that my premise was that in an evidence-based, science-based business, people would follow the evidence, which is that organisations with women as part of their leadership do better than organisations without women. It's a fact. The second observation is that this is not a supply problem. There are plenty of women capable, able and ready to contribute. This is a demand problem. I am not a believer in discrimination of any kind, and positive discrimination is positive discrimination. But we're back to risk minimisation. At the end of the day, when most boards are faced with the opportunity to hire somebody who looks like them or somebody who doesn't, they hire the person who looks like them. So we need chairs and leaders actively to seek diversity. I don't just mean gender diversity, actively to seek people who disagree with them, with whom they can have intelligent debate. Your best friends are the ones who tell you when you're doing something stupid, not the ones who agree with you all of the time.
Thank you. Paul?
Very good. Just briefly, we've incorporated as part of our workforce planning, which looks at modeling attrition, retirement, turnover, and recruiting staff. We've actually made key elements around diversity, female leadership, female scientific leadership. So acknowledged, it continues to be a significant issue, but we are working that into all future plans around our staffing models.
Okay, thank you. And the time is up, and lunch is beckoning. But we'll just finish, and maybe Sarah, you may want to take a photocopy of this economics journal, where even in the Nordic countries, which have an active policy promoting women in leadership roles, you'd be quite shocked to hear that only 6% of Norwegian firms have a female CEO, compared to 5% of American Fortune 500. And Finland, similar issue, Denmark. So even in these countries where they've actively have women in key leadership roles, something's going wrong there as well. I couldn't believe when I read the article last night. It's quite shocking. Something has to happen, because doing the same thing is a sign of madness at the moment. We're just doing the same thing. On that one, it's the end, and I hope you've had a good session. I'd really like to thank Paul, Sarah and Nick. I think it's been a great session, and let's enjoy lunch. Thank you.